It was February of 1959. Back in New York from his respite in Paris, he knew now that he had to keep rigidly to the system he'd carved out for himself. He'd learned that if he deviated from it even once, he would be in trouble. His whole financial structure was immediately in danger. It could crash like a deck of cards. His first move in New York was to erect an iron fence between himself to ensure that he did not repeat any of his previous errors. He first decided to spread out his deals among 6 brokers. This way his operations would not be followed. To guard himself against any possible interference from them, he put up a barrier. He used this way of protection for the rest of his life. He blocks his calls during the day. Working in the nightclubs, he normally slept during the day anyway. In this way, everything happened on Wall Street while he was in bed. He's sleeping while they're working and they can't reach him or worry him. His delegate, the stop-loss order, represents him in case something unforeseen happens. He asks his broker to send out their telegrams after Wall Street closing time, so they would reach him at 6 p.m. At 7 p.m. he starts to work, studying his daily telegrams using end-of-day data. Before he does this, he buys a copy of an afternoon paper that contains Wall Street closing prices. He tears out the pages giving the day's quotations and throws the rest of the financial section away. He does not wish to read any financial stories or commentaries, however well informed. They might lead him astray. Then, with his telegram and his page of the newspaper, he settles down to work while Wall Street sleeps. During the 2 weeks in Paris, he spent it repairing his injured confidence. The 2 stocks he did not sell continued to rise. Universal Controls had an almost uninterrupted advance until it stood around $60. This was more than a 40% rise since his last New York visit. Thiokol behaved equally well and now was pushing over $110. This was very promising indeed. He decided he had no reason whatsoever to touch them. Armed by his bitter experience and well entrenched behind his new strong fence, he began to move into the market with cautious advance. This was very promising indeed. He decided he had no reason whatsoever to touch them. Armed by his bitter experience and well entrenched behind his new strong fence, he began to move into the market with cautious confidence. He then has successful operations where he extracts a profit of $30,722.13. This, being the stock market, not all his deals were successful. Many stocks did not behave as he had predicted, but he only loses $5,951.82 on those. These 2 tables confirm that he was successful in taking larger profits than losses in proportion to the amounts he invested. He earns a positive 10.17% minus 3.2%, which is equal to a 6.97% positive return. All these operations were entirely done by telegram. Darvis is essentially one of the first screen traders. The big pit and floor traders fail when trading across the screen. Darvis developed a screen trading system that works. He heard the news when his telegrams arrived, good or bad, every day at 6 p.m. Then he began to act. Signs of trouble started to show up in Universal Controls. It began to lose its steady upward marching progress. Its activity in advance became wild, too wild. This spelled trouble, and trouble surely came. After an advance from $66 in the first week of March, the stock rose within 3 weeks to $102. It switched momentum volume phases and began to go in the other direction. Nicholas did not like the look of this drop at all. It felt as if there was an air pocket and there seemed no sign of a rise. Dr. Lee is a finance professor from Cornell, and Swaminathan is a finance professor from Stanford. Their research regarding momentum volume phases documents the existence of these waves that Nicholas Darvis noticed. If Darvis were not careful, he might get caught in a nosedive. So he brought up his stop loss within 2 points of the day's closing price. He was sold out of Universal Controls the next morning at varying prices between 86.5 and 89.5. This was more than 12 dollars from the high. There was no reason he should be unhappy. He had a good long ride, and his total selling price was $524,669.97. This gave him a gain of $409,356.48, or 354.99%, using rights. Don't forget the study by Boyer and Vorkink in the Journal of Finance that shows that Calls, which are very similar to rights, offer the highest possible return of any option investment out there. He now had a very large capital to invest. He took a careful look at the market, looking as usual for an actively traded high-priced stock. Another problem arose at this point which made a suitable stock more difficult to find. With this amount of money to spend, he must be careful not to allow his own buying to unduly influence the market. He bought his first 2,000 shares at an average price of 94 3/8 in the second week of April and another 1,597 7/8. As the stock continued to act well, he added to his holdings 2,000 shares. The average price of this last purchase was 101.5. This, as you realize, involves big money, more than $500,000 in fact. This table shows the total position that he accumulated. Thiokol were now his partners of long standing and had, like old-time partners, a special relationship. He had always allowed Thiokol a greater leeway, in other words, in terms of a trailing stop than other stocks, partly because he really felt this stock and because he had the great advantage afforded by the special subscription account. Remember that rights equal warrants equal long call options. A deep-in-the-money call option will give you the same leverage Darvis used with rights. It would have been foolish to give up such a unique credit arrangement, so he always kept his trailing stop loss far behind its rise. This he would do with no other stock, but in the case of Thiokol, it had saved him twice from being sold out. The second time was when Thiokol had a very bad reaction in the first week of April. This reaction came on the heels of the announcement of a 3-for-1 split. It was so severe that he thought they would have to part, but Darvis decided to let his stop loss decide. This was not touched off, and the sinking price pattern was quickly followed by a vigorous rise. However, he was not the only investor who liked Thiokol. The newly split stock was met by a hectic public response which shot it up $72 in the first week of May. The response was good. It led to this amazing situation. Thiokol's activity for the week was an incredible volume of 549,400 shares. Its advance for the week was 13.25 points. That's $13.25 per share. The trading volume represented an aggregate value of $40 million. The volume price difference for the week was $7 million. It looked as if every trader on the New York Stock Exchange had done nothing else all week but rush in and out of Thiokol. The governors of the New York Stock Exchange decided to suspend all the rules. The effect of this was that most traders left the stock alone. They would not buy and sell a stock where they could not protect themselves. It also meant that Nicholas Darvis was automatically out of the stock himself. They'd taken his most powerful tool away, and he could not work without it. He sold his Thiokol holdings at an average price of $68. This gave him over $200 for each of his original 6,000 shares under the 3-for-1 split. He'd paid a total of $820,000. For his 18,000 split shares, he received $1,212,851.52. His profit was $862,031.52. or 245.72%. The prospect of putting $1 million back into the market posed an enormous problem. He would have to be doubly careful. This was too much money to switch to another stock easily. It was such a big sum, it was bound to influence the market. He also had to face the fact that his stop loss would no longer be practical, because no trader or specialist would absorb such a large order quantity of stock in a matter of seconds. There was only one thing to do. He decided to divide his funds into two parts. Once he'd made up his mind to do this, selection was comparatively easy. He had only to decide among 4 stocks: Zenith Radio, Litton Industries, Fairchild Camera, and Beckman Instruments. There was only one way to do this. Let their strength in the market be the judge. This table from May 13 of 1959 displays his pilot purchases. On each stock, he placed a stop-loss order 10% below the buying price. He was fully aware that these stop-losses were vague and too mechanical. It was a deliberate, if clumsy, method. He purposely used his system because he knew that sooner or later it would eliminate those of the 4 that were the weakest. On May 18th of 1959, he was stopped out of Beckman Instruments at $60. And on May 19th, he decided to sell Litton Industries at $106.25. It was acting worse than the others. Now he adjusted his stop losses on all remaining stocks. In this table, you can see he's split the million into two main parts here between Zenith Radio and Fairchild Camera. And then in this table here, you can see the split and how he ran the tests across all four of these stocks. He's really put himself into a position that's really wonderful where he can just simply do nothing, because at that time he had 6 brokers. He closed his account with 3 of them. Then he sat back and watched the stocks that he held. There was nothing else for him to do while Texas Instruments, Zenith Radio, and Fairchild Camera went to work for him. During June of 1959, telegrams continued to flash between Wall Street and the Plaza Hotel. They were meaningless to the Western Union operators, but they were full of meaning for Nicholas. For instance, on June 9th, he received the following telegram: Z 122.5, 124 to 116 3/4. T 119 1/4, 121 1/2 to 117 1/4. F 125, 126 to 121. The following day's telegram reads: Z 132 3/8, 132 1/2, 125. T 123 3/4, 123 7/8, 120 3/8. F 130, 130 to 126 1/2. They were boring, meaningless hieroglyphics to the operator, but they meant a lot to Nicholas. They told him that the value of his holdings had appreciated $100,000 in that one single day. This was a very strange life. He sat in the plaza every evening, reading his telegram and filing it. There was nothing further he could do. He felt elated and restless, but powerless. He was like a scientist who, after years of work and research, had successfully launched a rocket to the moon. And now, as he tracks it climbing higher and higher, he has a tremendous sense of achievement and a strange letdown feeling of inactivity. Note that W.D. Gann writes to never sell out of boredom. The sidelines. He was now on the sidelines, just keeping vigil while his stocks continued to climb steadily like well-made missiles. Then one day in early June, he received an offer to appear in the Sporting Club in Monte Carlo. He accepts it gladly. Sitting still was beginning to hold a slight boredom after all his nerve-wracking problems and panics of the past. Before deciding to leave New York, he asked his 3 remaining brokers to meet him. He went through his accounts with each of them. He found that if they were to sell out before flying to Europe, he could cash in his stocks for over $2.5 million. He still has the same dilemma. He's always faced with the same dilemma he'd known before. Should he sell? Should he get out altogether? The answer this time was easy. It was the old tried and true answer. He did not have any reason to sell a rising stock. He could just continue to jog along with the trend, trailing his stop loss behind him. As the trend increased, he would buy more. If the trend reversed, he would, as ever, flee like a disturbed burglar. He put new stop losses on all his stocks so that if they dropped while he was on his way to Europe, he would be sold out and his $2 million would remain intact. He felt content and assured as he rode up Fifth Avenue in a taxi before leaving his brokers. He walked into the lobby of the Plaza Hotel, automatically bought an evening paper, tore out the Wall Street closing prices, threw the rest of the paper away, picked up his 6 p.m. telegram, and went up in the elevator. With a happy sigh, it was now 6.5 years after he'd been offered the Canadian stock called Breland, trading across the Toronto Stock Exchange right here by the Smith brothers. In his room, he opened the telegram, spread out the sheet of newspaper, and sat back with a happy sigh. Not only because he'd made $2 million, but because he was doing what he liked best. He was working while Wall Street slept.